Blog Talk Radio.
Raw living is a state of mind, a way of being in alignment with your body. Raw living means you put yourself and your body first. Your host, Sidhu-Robb, is the founder of Nosh Detox, located in the UK. They offer innovative raw food smoothies sold across Europe. You experience it in your skin, your body, and your mind. And now it's time for Living Raw Radio.
Nosh Detox is an award-winning company for your ultimate health improvement. Nosh Detox system works on all areas of the body, having dealt with thousands of clients whose health dramatically improved within days. For more details, visit noshdetox.com. noshdetox.com.
Do you feel bloated? Is your energy levels really low? Do you find everything that you eat goes straight to fat? My name is Candice, and I am the naturopathic nutritionist at Nosh Detox. I'm here to tell you that your body needs a rest. If that sounds like you are ready to try a Nosh juice fast. A juice fast is the most natural way for your body to detox, while providing you all the life-saving minerals and vitamins that your body needs and craves. From beginners to advanced juices, we have all the options that may be available to you or suited to you. Call me on 0845 257 6674 or go to noshdetox.com and click on the right program for you. I'm right here to help you and support you. Thank you.
And you're live with Sidhu-Robb, host of Living Raw Radio.
Good evening, everybody. This is Geeta, and this is Living Raw Radio, as the man says, and it is really lovely to be with you after what feels like a really, really long time. We are back here in not-so-sunny London, in not-so-light London, and not-so-dry London in any way. It has absolutely rained on us all day. And those days come to teach us to appreciate the days that haven't rained on us, or something like that. We're going to take a slight change today, because today we're going to be talking to one of my oldest and dearest friends who does something really, really interesting. And normally we talk about how people, women usually, but I want to talk about what interests me, and maybe most of the time women just are, for me, women entrepreneurs particularly, are always more interesting. But this is another subject that's really dear to my heart, because today we're going to talk about educating women and talk about why and how and what difference it makes and how it affects children and just what it means to be educated, especially in an emerging market or an emerging country. I don't know how many of you know, but I grew up in Africa, and I grew up in the southern part of Africa in a place called Malawi, which only became famous because Madonna decided to adopt from there, bless her. Before, every time I said I came from Malawi, everybody went, what? Now, when I say I come from Malawi, because, oh! And do you know? This is the bad news. Madonna refused to adopt me. I tried. I said my education's paid for, I'm cheap, and she said, no, all that beauty surgery will be way too expensive, and she completely bounced me. It just didn't work. So I have online today Catherine Goge, and it feels very formal to be calling her that, who is somebody I have absolutely known completely forever and is on the line, I hope. Cass, you there?
I'm here, Keith.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
We're doing really, really well. Give me an introduction, Cass, to who you are, what you do to get you to hear, because I know you're the director of OER Africa. What does that mean?
Well, OER Africa, OER, I should probably start with that since it's an acronym. It's an acronym for Open Educational Resources. And what we do is that we work with faculty in universities across Africa, well, whether in English-speaking Africa, and we support them in transforming education using materials that are licensed under an open license rather than a copyright license. Because a copyright license just basically makes textbooks really expensive and then no one can afford them. An open license gives you access to materials of similar quality, of better quality, sometimes of worse quality, so we ignore those, but allows you to adapt them and change them to suit your own circumstances so that you're really enriching the curriculum that you're able to offer your students.
Right, so the whole basis of this is supported on whatever is, it's like software for the internet, isn't it? Open software and software that actually isn't open.
It actually came right out of the open software movement. So this is about open content. And so, yeah, they're completely related.
So who creates open content?
Anybody at all.
They post it where?
They post it on their own websites. They post it in particular repositories. So if you're talking about health resources, for example, there are all kinds of repositories online. Some are open. Some of them you have to have a password or you have to be affiliated to a university or a particular teaching hospital to access them. But people put those resources on there because they might have discovered some, very funky new way of teaching their students how to understand a particular concept. And you're not going to make tons of money out of it, but you're certainly going to save other faculty and students a lot of time if you post that they can use it too.
Well, that's fantastic. So it's basically a concept of A, generosity, and B, sharing.
Exactly. You've got it in one. And that's what education is supposed to be about. You're supposed to be enriching a global knowledge pool, not shutting it off into places where people can access it.
So you have there then OER Africa. It's part of the South African Institute for Distance Education.
Right.
And so why aren't you're in Nairobi, why aren't you in South Africa? So I want to get all the stupid questions over with because this is the way my brain works. Why are you in Nairobi and not in South Africa?
I'm in Nairobi because the SADI, the South African Institute for Distance Education, has traditionally worked with Southern Africa. And they wanted a way to be able to work with the rest of the continent as well. OER Africa, being headquartered in Nairobi, just makes us that much more accessible to the rest of the continent without looking like we are a Southern African necessarily initiative, because they're different.
Yeah, it's true. And there's more politics and stuff as well, especially if you're an African. So tell me what you do. What is the purpose of, what do you see as being what you do? Because I get the point about the education, but tell me what you do.
The point of what I do, if I answer that first, is that, when you were introducing the subject, you were talking about the way our economies are changing on the continent. In Kenya, we've discovered recently, we found oil, we found water, we found mineral deposits and precious and gemstones. This is just one country, and we're not alone in this. It's going to transform everything, just everything about Kenya, from infrastructure to people's livelihoods, and it's quite a challenging thing that many countries on the continent are grappling with, that their economies are growing really, really fast at a time when economies in Europe and North America are shrinking. There are all kinds of opportunities.
We suddenly went from being the third world to suddenly becoming the first developing world. And it's interesting that you say that, because success is very challenging because you need the resources. And part of the resources of developing success is that the people need to be able to handle success.
Precisely. And that's exactly what I see as the importance of the kind of work that we're doing. It's no longer enough to be putting people through an education system that gives them subject matter competence. That subject matter competence is really important. You've got to understand whatever your subject is, whether you're in the field of health, agriculture, whatever it is. But more than that, you need to be able to operate in the 21st century. So you need to be able to know how to network, how to work with other people, the people around you, the people across borders. You need to be able to solve problems, to think quickly on your feet, and not to expect that what happened in school, what happened in the classroom is the way that the world is going to operate. And those so-called soft skills are becoming much more important, and they're the only way that the people who live on the continent will really be able to fully take advantage of all of the new opportunities that are arising.
Well, and also when you get to the stage, though, that also we are now drilling this down to the fact that we have to create new generations that are educated, because that brings us... I saw a film recently, and I wish I remembered it. It must be very famous, and I'm sure someone remembers it, where they talked about educating one girl saved X million pounds ultimately because of that education. But if Africa is going to step up, then the women have to be educated, because if the women are not educated, the children are not educated. Because isn't it like that? Or is that just a sweeping statement that's not correct?
I think it's absolutely correct. It's correct in Africa, and it's probably correct in any developing part of the world. It's also correct in the so-called first world. Education saves lives. If you aren't educated at the most basic level, if you can't read, you can't write, you can't add, you can't subtract, you're trapped in a world that very few people are living in with you. As soon as you have just that ability to be able to read, to be able to write, all of the indicators around infant mortality, around nutrition, around life expectancy, all of those indicators go up, because you're suddenly able to understand what it is you should be eating, how it is you should be storing your food, so that when the next drought comes along, you don't necessarily suffer from a famine. You're understanding why it is that it's important to inoculate your children. And if you don't believe in inoculation, at least you're in a position to actually have that debate and have that discussion. You can have an informed discussion. You can educate yourself. So absolutely, education saves lives.
So when you look at something like, and we're not even talking now just about survival skills, because that's become one of the joys and the tribulations of living in a market that has suddenly started shooting in growth. When you're now living in a market where it's not just about survival, but it's also about how can I make really good informed choices, and not just about my vaccination anymore, but, there's an enormous, incredible middle class across Africa, which is something that most people just don't know anything about, firstly. Secondly, when I look at my 5 or 6 top breadwinning girlfriends, almost all of them actually come from Africa. Right? And that's a perception that people haven't quite caught up with, where everybody works. Everybody works, they earn money, and they do that because they were educated, so they were able to do that, right?
I think that's one of the... It doesn't sell newspapers.
Yes, it really doesn't. And it's shocking that people don't understand.
War and trauma and disease. This sells, and it doesn't matter where those awful things are happening. This is the kind of thing that's going to sell your newspaper, saying that lots and lots of women in Africa are educated, and they are the vice chancellors of universities. They are running hospitals in the private sector and in the public sector. They're earning in 6 figures. They're creating employment. They're doing all kinds of amazing things, as well as winning Nobel Prizes. That, for some reason, is not so interesting a story.
Yeah. So, you know that. I know that, because this is where we come from. So tell me how it works. What are the challenges in trying to get, for example, women? What are the challenges in trying to get women educated?
It actually depends on where you are in terms of your socioeconomic grouping. If you are at the bottom end of society, wherever you are, your challenges are, they're huge. The obstacles to your going to school are huge, because your parents are faced with such educating however many children they have. And in many places, it is still the case that they will opt to educate the boys over educating the girls. So that's one of the challenges. So even getting to school. In those places where free primary school education is universally accessible, the challenge then becomes around continuing your education. So you'll get to primary school, but you might be cut off from progressing to high school or to university, because when you get to a certain level, then you do need to pay, and maybe your parents can't afford it, and maybe you can't afford it. There are also social norms. There are cultures where it's expected that people get married early, or that they will have to drop out of school and undergo some painful initiation ritual, an initiation into adulthood, which for some reason is often associated with pain. And those are the kinds of things that the most vulnerable and the most poor people on the continent are facing. What I've begun to see, which is also quite interesting, is that when you start looking at the much smaller top end of that pyramid of society, where people are earning well and where they are not thinking about whether they're able or not to supply their daily needs, because that they do as a matter of course, then you find educated, highly educated women now battling on a much smaller front, which is the domestic front. They have been socialized and conditioned to excel, and they have gone to school and they've gone into the workplace and they have excelled. And they come home in the evening and they try and tamp down their success and their abilities so as not to offend a husband who may be less financially successful.
That's got nothing to do with just being in Africa, has it? That's got to do with being anywhere, frankly.
I suppose. I was speaking to what happens in Africa, which is where I live, and I find that quite it's actually quite distressing, because there aren't thousands, hundreds of thousands of female role models that women can aspire to on the continent. They're constantly charting their own paths. They're charting new paths. They can't say that they are the same as anybody else.
Yeah. So when you're now doing what you're doing, and you're offering this, it's because you are a virtual marketplace, right? It's not like you're a physical university.
We're not a university. We actually go to universities that have asked to work with us, and we work directly with the faculty. And we're very clear. What we do, for example, is that here's an example. We worked with a couple of universities in Ghana and a couple of universities in South Africa, and the challenge that faculty in the health sciences were facing was that they just didn't have relevant teaching resources for their students. One of the doctors in Ghana had us in stitches when he said, the textbooks that were available to show a doctor how to draw blood gave beautiful descriptions about looking for the vein on the inside of a person's wrist or the inside of the crook of their arm. And all of the diagrams were of Caucasian skin, and the veins were described as being pink or blue or red. And he was quite a dark-skinned man, and he was showing us his wrist and saying, okay, so you tell me what you can see there. Okay, then. Right. So what we did in that instance was that we helped them to just create their own resources, their own texts and multimedia resources for their students, where resources just didn't exist in instances like that. So these were subject matter experts. These are highly skilled doctors and surgeons and what have you. And they were certainly never in all of their educational lives taught how to wield a video camera or how to do any of the things that are now more and more expected of higher education practitioners, that you'll know how to not just video your own lecture, but actually to show and to demonstrate surgical skills at a pretty basic level at least, so that your students have on a flash drive or something a video that they can look at in the evenings and go over, so that when they're coming back to class, they're not asking the really basic questions. They're asking far more detailed questions because they've had time to understand and to absorb and to interact with the material. Is that answering your question?
Yeah, it does. Because so what you're saying is that you are adding on that kind of patina of the things that we're used to having within our education, and you're offering those things as an adjunct to universities that otherwise couldn't have them.
Yeah, we're letting faculty in African universities know that they absolutely can have them, and they can absolutely create them because they are
how to do them.
Yes, and this is how. And because they know their students and they know their subject, they know what it is that their students need. They just perhaps were not able to give it to them before. So they were just dependent on their yellow notes and their lectures and their skill.
So it's not actually
experience.
just saying, let me fund this stuff for you. It's saying, here's how you use it, here's what you do with it.
And here's how you can create your own so that we become irrelevant. Because one of the things that was important to us when we were starting OER Africa was that we wanted to be able to be passing on skills to faculty that they could use forever, whether or not they chose to work with us ever again. Because that business of creating dependencies on NGOs and on projects and on donors is just not self-sustaining. It doesn't work.
Right. Yeah. No, I suppose it doesn't. Now, how do you track the benefit of what you're doing in terms of a real person?
We do it. We've had all sorts of anecdotes, and we also go back and visit the universities and talk with the faculty about what is happening. So one fascinating story we were told was by a hematologist, and he posted online slides for his students about blood counts or something like that. I'm not a doctor. I'm not sure what that was all about. But what was interesting is that he explained to us over dinner a couple of months ago that particular blood conditions, they represent in different ways depending on, or they mean different things. It's the same representation, but they mean different things depending on where you are. So the same blood cell pattern in Europe might suggest an autoimmune deficiency that if it shows up in Africa, might be suggesting a parasitic invasion or a parasitic illness of some kind.
Right.
So when he posted these slides online, he was contacted for his students because that's who he was thinking about. So he posted them on his institution's website, and then we harvested the metadata and we pushed those resources into global health repositories so that anybody who was looking for hematological slides would come across those as they were coming across any others. And a doctor in Croatia, who himself was suffering from some kind of a blood condition, came across those slides because he was Googling. He was trying to figure out what was wrong with him. And he was under treatment, and his doctors were just not able to resolve whatever the particular condition was. Yeah. As a result of putting that knowledge out there, this doctor in Croatia, his doctor, and Professor Oheneo Paresem in Ghana now formed a 3-man team to try and solve this doctor's illness. And the last time we talked, this doctor was well on the way to recovery. But he just wouldn't have known that this was a possibility, that he was not suffering from an autoimmune disease at all. And the part of Croatia that he actually lives in has a Mediterranean climate, which is far more similar to a tropical climate than the rest of Europe.
So there's a place where what we're saying is we're almost jumping a few generations of technology in the way that you guys are looking at delivering education.
Absolutely.
I've always thought that the internet actually changed how the whole of Africa literally existed, because it created accessibility of information to a generation of people that had no other way of doing it. And I've always heard, you sit in the West and they talk about, well, you can't even get electricity. And you're like, you may not get electricity, but let me tell you, man, you're getting internet somehow. You're getting phones somehow, because this is what people need for the information, and they're making sure that they get it. When you look at environments which don't have access to the internet, is that a problem for what you're trying to do in the places you're trying to get access, or are you just saying the places that have the internet, we're opening that up so that you can talk with the wealth of knowledge that there is in our markets, and our markets can talk to the wealth of knowledge that is outside our markets? Because now, I mean, earlier today, I spent a lot of time listening to somebody who was talking about virtual diagnostics. Mm-hmm. There's a woman setting up an entire website where it's just about virtual diagnostics. You can speak to your psychotherapist virtually, you can speak to your doctor, diagnostics, everything will happen virtually. So if we can educate virtually, we can do everything virtually.
We can do a lot of things virtually. We started working in 2008. OER Africa started in 2008. And when we started visiting universities across Africa, very often we would find that vice chancellors and senior academics didn't necessarily have a laptop. They might have had a desktop. Senior academics very often had a secretary who used that desktop. Senior academics, like senior lawyers, just didn't tend to use that kind of technology. Last year, we were running a workshop on the use of ICT for higher education for vice chancellors who are affiliated with the Association of African Universities. Every single one of those participants had 2, 3, 4 mobile devices that they were using. So they were charging their iPhone while they were using their iPad.
While typing into their laptop.
Exactly.
So life has just moved on.
Life has moved on at a tremendously fast pace. So it's the pace of change in Africa. When you're saying that we're having to leapfrog things, it seems to constantly be the case on our continent. Where it's catch up. And it's doing some things incredibly fast and incredibly well, and some things very, less well. But this whole technological wave is happening at so many levels. You have people who are farmers in the field who are now accessing the cost of their particular crops on the global market as they are going into harvest, because they've cottoned on to the fact that the prices that they're getting for their crops, especially if you're thinking about something like coffee and East African coffee, Rwanda, Burundi, Ethiopia, Uganda, Kenya, is some of the finest coffee in the world. And farmers are getting the equivalent of what? Just over a pittance, yeah. What is 100 shillings? It's 10
Not very
pounds.
Much. A pound. Yeah, I
Yeah.
usually do 100 to 1 as an exchange rate.
Yeah. So you're getting a pound for a bag of beans that you will then the Starbucks guys will then charge you, a pound for half a cup of coffee made with Kenyan
I'm
coffee.
sorry, £4 for a cup of coffee.
For an entire cup, yeah.
A whole cup, of which admittedly the coffee is only about 20% and the rest is everything else. But yeah. Because
yes, and also because that coffee is some of the finest coffee in the world, it's used to blend other coffees and raise the quality of coffees from the rest of the world. So farmers are realizing this, and they're cottoning on to this, and they're going online, and they're going online on their smartphones, which are more and more readily accessible. And they're checking
the world's coffee markets. But how is that now helping women?
It's helping women because the majority of farmers on the continent are women.
I knew you were going to say that, but I just wanted to let you the opportunity to say that in case I was completely wrong. I was thinking, I'm sure.
No, you're absolutely right. If you're talking about fresh cut flowers for export, the majority of women who are working on flower farms all over the continent are women. The majority of women who are growing food crops, the majority of farmers growing food crops are women. It's women. The women are feeding their families. They have traditionally fed their families in many parts of the continent. And in traditional farming communities, you will often find that the role that men had was to clear the land so that the women could plant and harvest. They have always been farmers. My mother's a farmer. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, when you're looking at the facts, so what we've done is we've got a bunch of women here who otherwise are cut off and they're rural. Because what happens in farms back home is that you grow the crops, then when you've harvested, you take them to local auction spots. And
Correct.
Those places are where people come to buy, because my father was a tobacco farmer, so I know this.
Correct.
I grew up with it.
I remember.
Yeah, so you would we loved the auction houses, because actually it was the only place we got sandwiches, because nobody at home ever let us have sandwiches, because they weren't considered to be good food. The frankly, I was absolutely delighted. I was like, bring it on. But once you've got to the auction houses, you have a bid made for that product. And if you don't have any better information, you will buy on that bid. That's been blown completely. So in a way, what we've done is taken education and broadened the sense of it, because you're talking about people being able to educate themselves, not just about their learning, but about crop prices and all sorts of other things. Has it actually had a direct trickle-down effect on their learning, the school learning?
Well, we work in the higher education sector, so I don't want to comment too much on school learning. But I do know that more and more across the continent, certainly in Kenya, the idea of introducing tablets or laptops, that whole one laptop per child phenomenon, is growing in importance, because people are suddenly realizing that there's a whole world of content out there, and that the role of a teacher or a faculty member is no longer so much to be the transmitter of knowledge, but to be somebody who mediates between what is of quality, what is good, and what is absolutely junk. And those more and more are going to be the kinds of skills that we need children to learn, and to learn early. When you go online, you're going to find a whole host of everything. How will you be able to discern whether some of it is stuff that you should actually be listening to? Do you know how to check sources and to counter-check sources? These are the kinds of skills that will be so important as understanding, whatever your lesson is that day.
Right. So it's almost invaluable. And so you guys create a structured platform for the delivery of some of this information to learning places.
We go into universities where people have been kind enough to invite us to work with them, and we speak with faculty about what their needs are, what their challenges are, and what technology is available to them.
Right.
And we try to work with them to find a solution that will work within whatever constraints they have. And across the continent, the constraints vary enormously. You could be at the University of Jos and in Nigeria, where you are suffering from power cuts for more of the time than you actually have electricity. That's one instance. You could be at the University of South Africa, UNISA, which is one of the largest providers of distance education in the world, where you are overwhelmed by the resources that you have at hand, because it is such a well-resourced university.
Yeah.
So it just depends on where you are at any given point in time. And it also often depends on the vision of whoever it is who is running one of those kinds of institutions. Olive Mugenda, for example, is the Vice Chancellor of Kenyatta University in Kenya.
Yeah.
And it occurred to her that one of the reasons that perhaps we had a dearth of women doing PhDs was because across the continent, across most of the continent, there isn't the kind of accommodation for PhD students that you traditionally find at a university like
so they have to fund it.
Oxford. They have to fund it. They have to, if they're going to try and actually be on campus, then you're living with undergrads, which is probably a fate worse than death for a mature student.
Do you remember how appalling we were at university? Yes.
Exactly. So she used the resources that she had and applied for grants and applied for funding from the government, from all kinds of private sources. And she's building hostels for mature students. So you're going to get your live-in flat where you can be there with your partner, with your children if necessary, for the whole 3 to 4 years that it will take you to complete your PhD program, so that you're not having to do that commute in traffic and doing things that otherwise distract you from what it is that you're doing. She's building a second referral teaching hospital. It will be the second referral teaching hospital in the country. That's being built. No, that was commissioned this year. So vision is really important. And she's not the first vice chancellor that university has had, but she is the first woman vice chancellor that university has had. And these are just some of the things that she's been able to achieve in the course of her tenure.
So what next? What do you see that you personally would like to achieve? Where would you like to be? What would you like to do that you haven't managed to do?
Lots of things. One of the things that I would really love to do is to complete my own PhD. I am fascinated by women in across the continent whose stories have very rarely been told. Women who perhaps were living in the colonial era, and the reason that their stories aren't recorded anywhere is because history is very often the histories of men, the histories of wars, and the histories told from the perspective of the people who won those wars and battles. It can be pretty one-sided. And yet there were women who did all sorts of fascinating things on our continent. And that is an area into which I would love to delve deeper and to share those stories more broadly, because when girls are being told that they can't make a difference, they need to know that women have always made a difference.
Yeah,
and they've always
access to that information.
Yeah. They've always been brave. They've always stuck their necks out. They've always had the courage of their convictions. These girls are no different today.
It's true. There is, and I think now the difference is just that we can talk about it and we have access to it, and that just is a huge, big difference. Yeah. Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure. I don't think you and I have ever talked so much about work in our lives.
I can pretty much guarantee we haven't. It has been brilliant. Thank you so much for coming on at very short notice.
It was a pleasure to be on.
Yeah, what you guys don't know is that Kath came to stay with me, and I said, guess what? You're going on radio. And she went, oh, my God. So you've been a really good sport. And thank you so much. It's been really, really brilliant. This is Living Raw Radio with Catherine Gogi from OER Africa. And if you want to know more about what she does, the website would be, Kath?
www.oerafrica.org.
Fabulous. And I am Geeta Sidhu-Robb, and I will be with you this time next week. Join me, and we will be talking about something else absolutely fascinating. Take care.